Good morning, class, and welcome to Introduction to Philosophy. We are in week 6, and this is chapter 4 entitled The Nature of Reality. Our previous chapters were God, the Meaning of Life, and the introductory big questions. For this particular chapter, I want you to focus on particular opening questions and closing questions. So for everyone, please do opening question 1 and closing question 3. And we'll go over those two in particular. Closing question 3 is a good review. It'll be sort of a vocabulary heavy review, and I'll post a PowerPoint to help review the vocabulary words. And so the nature of reality philosophically, we're essentially asking what exists. The next question, the next chapter, which will deal with epistemology, will ask us how we know what exists and its nature. So have that essentially in the back of your mind when you're pondering this and trying to answer the questions in this chapter. The first one is basically an introductory question. It says, how real are the following items? Rate them on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is the most real and 1 is the least real. And it just gives you a variety of different items, and I think the authors do a great job of just selecting a variety of different items. And so you might ask yourself, well, how do you determine what is most real? And one way that philosophers have often gone about doing this is to ask, well, what would exist by itself that requires nothing else but itself to exist? And that would probably be the most real, many would say. And if another thing exists, but is dependent on something else for its existence, many would say that's less real. So that might be one way of doing it. The other thing to sort of ponder while you're doing this is to see what type of worldview you have. Right, so if you only believe, say, that material objects exist, so let's suppose you're a naturalist, then other things, maybe supernatural type things, wouldn't exist at all. So they would have the least real existence. Now they'd still exist in ideas, right? But the ideas would have less real existence. So for example, if we go down to something like let's see. Beethoven's music, right? So we assume that Beethoven's music wouldn't initially exist without Beethoven. But now that Beethoven has died, his music still exists. So you might sort of ponder which would be more real, Beethoven or Beethoven's music, right? Something that's not in here would be something like Hamlet, a character in Shakespeare's play. Now, in a certain sense, he's real. We all might know who he is and something about him, but he's not necessarily real in the same way, say, Einstein is real. Einstein's brain when he was alive. That seems more real, perhaps. So how are we going to judge the reality of different things? Some might say, if someone believes in God, that God is most real because God always existed and didn't need anything to bring God into being. It depends on one's definition of God. We spent all last week looking at varieties of definitions of God. So that could be most real, but if you're a naturalist and you don't believe, then that could be least real. They still might have some reality as a concept, but perhaps the same reality as perhaps the number 7, or perhaps something else. It would depend. If you don't believe in a soul, then your soul might not be real, but your mind, you might say, oh, I believe in a mind, but I don't believe in a soul. So you got to try to rank these things in the reality given the amount of reality you think they have, something like an angel, well, maybe in a worldview that could be real, but maybe you think they're not real, they're just made up entities, like a unicorn or something, or maybe you think a unicorn is real. You could just definitely vary quite a bit, but you have to sort of distinguish what you think is most real, what you think exists, and what you think has equal existence to other things. So does the person sitting next to you, if there's a person sitting next to you, and the chair you're sitting in, are they about as real? Is the person more real than the chair? And if so, how and why? Now, again, you won't be writing the how and why yet. That'll be in the closing question 3. You're just going to sort of be organizing your thoughts. Something like human rights. Those are real, but would they be real if humans didn't exist? It's an interesting question. Most would say no, they might not exist if humans didn't exist. Whereas would the theory of relativity exist if humans didn't exist? Einstein discovered it, but did he discover it, or was it more of a human creation of the mind to apprehend an idea of reality? Now this is something interesting. The color red, does it exist? And we're not talking about the wavelength, right? You might be if you're a naturalist, but we're talking about perhaps the experience of the color red. Is the color red reducible to the wavelength, or is the experience something different? And so we have the wavelength and we have the experience. Now, which one is the color red? Which one is more so a representation of what it actually is? These are metaphysical questions. These are ontological questions having to do with being and what something actually is, beyond the physical, perhaps. So, do this question, do question 1. The other questions are also really interesting, but focus on question 1. And then let's go to the closing question, 167, I think. Yeah. And again, this closing question 3 has a lot of parts, so do all of the parts. Do A through K. You don't need to write that many complete sentences, but one of the things you want to do is strive for consistency, and the consistency will show, at least to a certain extent, that you understand the concepts and the vocabulary. If you think the vocabulary is too limiting, though, say so. Okay, so let's read question 3. Categories in philosophy often seem too rigid or too simple-minded to classify the complexity of our views, but perhaps the following checklist will help you understand your own position in the history of philosophy. Say a little bit better, but again, the labels might be a bit oversimplistic, and if they are, if there's more of a duality to your view and less of a dualism, you can explain that in the answer. So part A, are you a materialist or an immaterialist? Do you believe that ultimate reality can be discovered by science? Do you believe that ultimate reality is a matter of religious belief? And so here, be careful with this question, because what you say about this might influence a lot of the rest of it, right? So for example, if you're an immaterialist, meaning you think that things exist that are immaterial, then how could science discover that? But I'm not necessarily talking about energy, which is immaterial, or other scientific things. I'm talking about more of a supernatural reality, perhaps. How could science discover that? If you still think it can, be sure to explain this. If you think that ultimate reality is materialistic, if you're a materialist, which means you believe that only material or matter exists, a naturalist might be a better word for it, then why would ultimate reality be a matter of religious belief, right? If everything could be understood naturalistically, what would religion help or contribute? If you say you're a materialist, but then you also believe in God, how or what is your definition of God? So this is interesting. Think about this question quite a bit and the complexity of it. Part B, What are the basic entities in your ontology? What is most real? Now, basic entities essentially mean those entities, if there are them, that are not dependent on other entities. What is sort of the origin of your cosmology? If certain things caused other things to exist, what are those things that either weren't cause, always existed, or are somewhat independent from other things, might be a way of looking at it. Are you a monist or a pluralist? Now, a monist believes that just one substance exists. It could be material, it could be immaterial, it could be ideal, but it's just one substance. If you're a pluralist, you believe that multiple substances exist. And Descartes essentially was a pluralist, even though he's often seen as a dualist. He believed that God existed, that minds exist, and that bodies exist. And those are three different types of substances. If you're a pluralist, what is the connection between the different entities in your ontology? And part of the philosophical question becomes, if two things have completely different substances, then how could they possibly interact? This is a problematic aspect for philosophy. Descartes gets into it, Leibniz gets into it, other philosophers get into it. Rank them in order of their relative reality, or explain their relationship. So suppose you're a pluralist and you think that both bodies and souls exist and they're two different substances. Then how can they possibly interact? How can your soul and your body interact? And which one is more real, your soul or your body, and why? If you're just a monist and you think everything is one substance, what is that substance? D. Are the basic entities in your ontology eternal? If not, how did they come into being? Now, ontology is basically the study and the understanding of being or existence. Your ontology is what you think exists, ultimately. And it could be particular things or general things. It could be God, or it could be matter, or it could be both. It could be but general or particular. And if they are eternal, then you don't need to explain how they exist. They just always were. You have to explain essentially how you know. If they came into existence, how did they come into existence? E. Are you an idealist? Do you believe that the basic entities in your ontology are dependent on the existence of minds? So idealist has nothing to do with someone who has like ideals or has nothing to do with having like conviction or virtues that you want to see implemented in the world per se. An idealist in this philosophical context has to do with ideas, and you think that ideas have the greatest reality and ideas are either apprehended or created by the mind. How do you explain the existence of, or how do you deny the existence of the following? Minds, numbers, gods, tables, chairs, the laws of gravity, evil, moral principles, dreams, Santa Claus. This is when the question 1 from the opening is really going to help you right here. So to some extent, all of these things exist if only in the concepts of our language. But which ones have greater existence, lesser existence? How do you know? How do you justify it? And again, don't just necessarily state, I think this, I think that, I think this, but also give reasons as to why. But you don't have to give that detailed of reasons, particularly given this question is so long. But do reflect on not just I think this, I think that, but also why or what is the justification for that? Is the experience of seeing a green flash nothing other than having a certain brain event go on inside your skull? Why would someone want to say that? What problems are there with this suggestion? Again, this is sort of stressing a priority with ontology. What is more real, your experience of something or that thing in the physical world? Again, is it the experience of the green? Or is it the neurological response to, say, the wavelength represented of green? What is more real and why? H. I like this one. This is a funny one. Could a computer have a sense of humor? What would it have to do to have one? Would it what would it have to do to convince you that it had one? And also, would it be enough to print out haha and shake around a bit? So obviously that's no, it wouldn't. But how could a computer or could a computer have a sense of humor? And this really gets at what it means to be human, and if what it meant to be human could be generalized. Much of what it means to be human means to be rational, but part of our rationality has to do with reflection, and our reflection and our rationality together often provide humor, right? We can find ourselves and others or events funny. We can find circumstances funny. And so to have humor would mean to have self-consciousness, and not just self-consciousness, but a high level of self-consciousness, of reflection, of thinking about our thinking. Could a computer do this? If it could, what does it say about what we are? And if it couldn't, again, what does it say about what we are? Does the universe have a purpose? Sometimes, why is there something rather than nothing? Right, this is an interesting question too. Not do we have subjective purposes in the universe, but does the universe itself have a purpose? Why? How do you know? What does the word real mean to you? Using your definition once again through the items, run once again through the items in opening question 1 and rate them for your in their reality. I'm just going to read that again. What does the word real mean to you? Using your definition, run once again through the items in opening question 1 and rate them for their reality in your view. You've already done that, but just sort of reflect on it. K, do you think this world is the real world, or do you believe that there is an existence more real than our own? And a lot of people, one example might be the afterlife. If there's an afterlife, that might be more real or more important than this world, or of equal importance. Is there an eternal world somewhere in which this world is just like a shadow? Is there a world of forms, like Plato thought so, that might be more real than this one? Is there a world of, is numbers or mathematics representative of a more real world? Or is this really the only world or the most real world? Here, world isn't necessarily like another planet, right? It's not like another Earth, although it could be, but it means more like another state of being than necessarily another world. But it could be another world in another sense too. So be sure to distinguish this. Okay, well, these are 2 rather long questions, but I wish you luck on them. If you have any questions about these questions, be sure to let me know. And I look forward to your answers. And hopefully I'll also post a PowerPoint that goes through quite a bit of vocabulary in this section to help you. Hopefully this helps. Take care and have a good time reading this and a good week.